Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to be talking with guest Carla Luna, a 2L at Harvard. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, that's me, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to be talking with guest Carla Luna, a 2L at Harvard. So welcome, Carla.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Before we jump in, can you just give our listeners a sense of your background and your own path to law school so they have some context?
Sure. So I started here at Harvard in 2018. I took 2 years in between undergrad and law school. I went to Babson College. It's a small business school here in Massachusetts. And my inspiration for going to law school was actually to be better in the business field. I was doing consulting before I came to Harvard, and I really thought that having a grasp of the law would help me to better advise business clients. But since then, my interests have changed and continue to change. I'm the first in my family to go to law school, and I did work in between the time I graduated from college and started law school, and I took 1 year to just apply to school.
Wow. All right. Well, we'll dig into that a little bit later. Tell us a little bit about the type of activities you're involved in now at Harvard and, kind of how your interests have shifted over time.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I'm interested in business. I'm on the Harvard Business Law Review. I'm also my biggest involvement is the Harvard Law Entrepreneurship Project, HLEP, here at school. And we work with entrepreneurs from the Harvard and MIT community, helping them answer their legal questions, usually around formation. And for example, my last project was helping an app developer create a terms of service. And that's really great experience because, as you know, first year classes tend to be more litigation heavy than actually doing like client facing work and like learning about how to advise. So that's been a great experience. I'm also involved in Alianza, which is the Latinx group here at school, and the Black Law Student Association.
Nice. Yeah, the entrepreneurship project, hard to say, does sound really interesting because I think that is a great point. It can be really frustrating sometimes. I mean, the school that I was at also had a lot of people who were interested in going into corporate stuff, and I feel like they didn't have as many options, and the classes just kind of weren't geared toward them. So that's really great that you've managed to find an outside way to get that type of experience that you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, I'm interested kind of in your summer jobs after your 1L, because a lot of our listeners are probably like either hunting for jobs now or they're thinking about it. And I noticed that you spent part of your summer working in Chicago. So I was kind of curious about that. Did you face challenges when you were interviewing for that job in a different city? And once you had it, was it logistically challenging, finding housing and all that? I think sometimes this can be really overwhelming. So tell me a little bit about that, if you would.
So I'm originally from New York, and the two cities that I applied to for a summer job were New York and Chicago. I felt comfortable applying to Chicago because I worked there for a year after undergrad, so it wasn't completely foreign to me. I worked at a firm. I worked at DLA Piper, and the firm was actually really accommodating when it came to interviewing. They arranged a Skype interview in their Boston office, so I just went into their Boston office, and it was a few interviews with different levels, some partners, some associates.
So you kind of did the whole callback process basically on video.
On video, yeah.
Interesting.
And as for finding housing, I actually did what most people do. I went through Facebook, and at first I tried Craigslist, but that was a little bit sketchy. So I went through Facebook, and I found housing through a college student group online, and then it was actually pretty affordable, especially compared to New York, which worked out. I ended up finding it pretty last minute. So I started May 20th at the firm, which was the Monday right after my last final, which was May 17th. So very quick turnaround. And I found housing in like mid-April.
Oh, that sounds a little stressful.
A little bit.
Yeah. What was that job like? What did you do? What did you learn from it? Were you able to kind of explore different options, or were you kind of in one area? What was that like?
So I was an LCLD scholar, and for those who don't know what that is, it's the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, and a lot of firms participate in the program. It's a way to enhance diversity in the legal profession. They usually hire 1 or 2 scholars per summer. And it's a really cool network because you go for a summit in early July, and you get to meet all the other LCLD scholars. This year was in Atlanta, and they just teach you tips for success and how to navigate your first summer at the firm. You also get connected to alumni who've done the program previously, which was really helpful. I was actually the only 1L at my summer job, which was interesting and also challenging because I felt like I was being held to the standard of a 2L, coming out of my first year where I'd only done 2 memos, my open and closed memo.
Yeah, I had a similar experience because I worked at a firm as a 1L. Yeah. And, I showed up on, the first week, and they asked me to go research something, and I kind of looked at them. I'm like, you realize I've only had 1 year of law school? They're like, yeah, well, get to work, go for it.
Yeah, but the program was really structured. They had us, they wanted us to complete a certain number of memos. For us, it was 6, and which was good and bad for me in a way, because I'd expressed to them that my interest was more in corporate, but they really wanted us to get that writing experience. And a lot of the corporate work doesn't lend itself to more extended assignments, so I ended up doing a lot of real estate and litigation related matters. But what was cool about the job is that I had each summer intern was each summer associate was assigned a reader who would, every time we submitted a memo, we would go through it with our reader and they'd give us feedback. So it wasn't like we were blindsided at the final evaluation or the midsummer evaluation. Like, we were getting continuous feedback throughout.
That's really great, because that is not necessarily super common in a lot of law firms. This sounds like a really interesting program. If people want to learn more about it, where can they go or look for that, do you think?
So again, the program's called Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, and you can find out more on lcldnet.org.
Nice. All right, cool. And then I noticed you also worked for the SEC starting in August. What's that position like? How did you find that, and what are you doing there?
So I'm actually still there right now. It's an independent clinical through Harvard, and initially I got the position as for my summer job, and I interviewed with the SEC in Washington, D.C., and then also in Boston. And I got both positions, but I really decided that I wanted to have firm experience my first summer. So something that I would advise listeners is to really maintain relationships, because I reached out to the people who conducted my interview, and I told them I'm still really interested in this opportunity and I'd love to come back in the fall. And they were able to make it happen, and I just, I spoke to my school about it. They said, if you find a professor who's willing to supervise you, you can set up an independent clinical, and that's what I'm doing. I've been at the SEC in Boston since August, and I'll be there through end of November.
That's
and it's mostly doing, it's a division of enforcement. So even though I'm not particularly interested in litigation, I'm interested in eventually doing potentially capital markets work. So it's been really interesting for me to learn about the securities laws, especially since I haven't taken a securities class yet.
Yeah, I was wondering when I looked at your resume, I was like, that's interesting because you started that job in August. So now it makes a lot more sense. I was like, is this a split summer? You're still doing it? I was kind of confused, but I love that you were able to kind of parlay a different opportunity into something that you were able to make work, even though you ended up taking a totally different and much probably more highly paid job, which congratulations. Yeah, if you can get the first year summer firm job, that's always a good one to have in your back pocket. I enjoyed it, and it does pay quite well. All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit because I want to talk to you about your 1L year. How was the adjustment to law school?
It was interesting. I think the biggest difference for me was the fact that we only have one assessment at the end of the term. Well, in your first year especially. Like in your second year, there might be papers and some other opportunities for feedback, but the fact that like you don't really know how you're doing in a class until you have that final exam, that was a big change for me. And I think that can be intimidating for a lot of 1Ls.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's intimidating for almost everyone. How did you handle that? You know, what resources, if you encountered some roadblocks along the way, were you using?
So Harvard has this program, it's called Board of Student Advisors, BSAs, and they work together with the Legal Research and Writing program for the 1Ls, and each class usually has about 2 or 3 BSAs, and each student is assigned to a BSA. And my BSA was super helpful for me. I know that Legal Research and Writing, it's the class with the least credits, but it's probably the most intensive class of 1L. And for me, like having that extra support was really helpful. And I felt like I could go to my BSA about like anything, like summer jobs, course selection. This was like an all-around mentor for me. So I know not every school has a program like this, but if you can find like that mentor, and sometimes you can find a mentor. For me, I also found mentors through Alianza and through the Black Law Student Association as well. I think like tapping into those resources, looking at like sometimes you have friends who will give you outlines from previous semesters or share their notes. That was also helpful for me.
Yeah, I remember having a mentor through the Women's Law Society, and that was nice because I'd come from California, and they tried to pair us up with people who were, you know, similar, and so I ended up being really good friends with this person. In fact, we're still friends now. But yeah, I think, you know, having that guidance is so important, whether it's social or academic or jobs. Like, you need someone that you can go to. And how about professors? Did you find it hard or easy to build relationships with your professors?
I think, so we had a section leader. He was also our Civ Pro professor, and we had meetings, like I think once a month we had a meeting with our section, and that was one way to like get close to our section leader. But as for my other professors, sometimes I would go to their office hours and talk to them about the class, but other times, like a lot of my professors have super interesting backgrounds. Some of them still practice outside of teaching, and I would just go and like talk to them about what they do. And I found that like to be really valuable, not just talking about the class, but finding out who are these people who are teaching me.
Right. I think sometimes people think like, oh, professors are so scary and, you know, they never want to talk to me. I'm just like a law student, whatever. But no, I mean, they're people, they have interests, you know, they're always curious about what their students are doing. And, you know, if you express like a real interest in their work, I think most people are pretty happy to talk about that. Well, we talked a bit before we got on this podcast about how neither one of us actually had a formal law school study group, which is one of those things I think sometimes people think there's no way you can survive law school without. But what did you do instead? And did you think it was helpful?
Yeah, I was actually worried about that. I felt like it was make or break to have a study group. Like I'd heard so much before going to law school. If you don't find your study group within the first month of law school, yeah, everyone buddies up and you're gonna be left out. I felt like I was gonna be like the last person on the dodgeball court. Yeah, like no
friends, and you're gonna fail all your exams.
But people have different study approaches. Like some people do study groups, some people don't. I wasn't big on it. I had one person in my section who was very much into studying. He actually set up a spreadsheet, and he had people sign up to study with him.
Wow.
He would set up time slots throughout the day, and he'd say sign up for a slot. But so I actually went to a few of those with him, but for the most part it was just I relied really heavily on the supplements, like the examples and explanations books, the E&Es they're called. I and just like taking previous exams from my own professor, and sometimes looking at exams from other professors as well. But my caution with that is like being able to filter, not like panicking because you see something you've never seen before. Because one of my professors told me, you're taking the professor as much as you're taking the class. So make sure that you're testing for what the professor's testing for.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true and is very good advice. So at Harvard, they do a really strict sectioning. I mean, you take all of your classes 1L year. Is it every semester with the same people or all year with the same people?
It was all first year, except for J term or winter term. We had some flexibility with that about who we would have our classes with. And then we're also able to pick an international elective in the spring and another elective. So J term or winter term was the first time that I actually had classes with other people, and it was actually a nice change to have to like meet different people. I'd met other people, but mainly only from my involvement in different clubs and activities at school. So it was really nice to meet new people.
Yeah, that's one of those things that different schools do really differently. And yeah, for me, when I heard that Harvard, it was like the same the whole year. I was like, wow, that would be so intense having the same, what is it, like 80 to 100 people in all of your classes?
80, yeah. What did they do at your school?
Well, at Columbia, at least when I was there, the first semester you were with one group, but then you had one of your substantive classes out of 3 that was a small group. So for me, that was contracts, and then Civ Pro and Torts were a section. And obviously legal writing was different. But then the second semester, they totally mixed it up again, and it wasn't even really that consistent. Like I had a few, like my roommate was in one of my classes, but not other classes. So it was much more fluid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think Harvard's the very classic, like this is your section. This is your formative crew of people you were doing your first year with.
Which is kind of scary because there's no way of telling. I don't even know how they group the sections. And then you don't know if you're going to get along with your section.
Yeah, I know. And they all seem to have different personalities too. You know, some of them are like the nice section or the less nice section. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It just seemed that like level of intensity of the same 80 people throughout seemed to me like I would probably go crazy. But, you know, whatever, you're at your school, they do what you do, you roll with it. Yeah, I'm actually curious, you know, how worried are Harvard 1Ls about grades? Because if people don't know this, they grade, if I'm not mistaken, on like the pass, high pass, low pass scale, right?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's a little bit misleading for people who don't understand the grade system as much. Like a lot of people ask me, so Harvard doesn't have grades, right? Well, yes and no. We don't have traditional grades. We don't have the ABCD scale, but we do have pass, high pass, and low pass, and there is some differentiation between those, but also it's a little bit nebulous. Like, what's the difference between a pass and an 8 and a high pass? Like, professors have flat out said, like, sometimes it depends on the time of day when they're grading the exam. Like, what becomes a pass and what becomes a high pass. So sometimes it's a matter of like chance, but I don't think that, at least in my section, people didn't talk about grades that much. And that's something I really appreciate and like informed my decision to go to Harvard. I knew I really didn't want to be at a school where I had to compete to be in the X% to get a job. And like the fact that we don't have traditional GPAs, that really does take a lot of the pressure off.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think that even having like a low pass isn't the end all be all for your academic career. I think
that at Harvard, you're probably going to be fine. Yeah, I mean, it's still a grading scale. It's just kind of a more compressed grading scale that in some ways I think actually probably increases people's like angst about it. You know, because it was like there's an A- and a B+ is probably basically like a pass or high pass, but you've got more variations. But anyway, again, you're at your school you're at. You can't deal with it. You can't really like do much about it. I mean, do you feel like people are really competing to differentiate themselves in other ways, or are people mostly just kind of playing their own game?
I think people have such varied interests. Like, I would say, like, some schools have a reputation for, like, feeding into big law or being more public interest focused, whereas, like, at Harvard, I feel like it's pretty varied. Like, there's a good number of people who are interested in public interest, a good number of people who are interested in big law. So people are doing a lot of different activities at school, outside of school, and I haven't really felt the competitive vibe. It just, in my experience, I haven't found it to be too competitive. I find it to be really supportive, and people feel comfortable doing their own thing.
Cool. Yeah, I think each school has its own personality, and definitely if you're listening to this and thinking about applying, it's worth looking into the, perceived personality of different schools, because Columbia certainly felt very competitive to me in a way that I was not expecting. Let's back up a little bit and talk about your application process. So, you mentioned that you spent some time doing this. What was that like, and how did you decide where you're going to apply, considerations around money, taking the money, not taking the money, that kind of thing?
So I did receive a full scholarship at another T14 school, and it was really hard, actually, to pass up that amount of money, especially considering the fact that both schools probably would have led me to the same place, getting a job in Big Law initially outside of law school. But what I was really thinking about was my experience. Where am I going to be the happiest? And partially because of the grading system, which I mentioned, but also when I visited both schools, I felt happier here at Harvard, and I don't think that any other school that I applied to has quite the network and like the widespread network that Harvard has, which was also part of my reason for coming here. And just also to provide some context, so when I went to Babson, I applied early decision. I actually never had the opportunity to apply to. I applied early decision as part of a scholarship program called Posse, and I didn't have the opportunity to apply to any Ivy League schools, and I didn't know what my chances would be. And I always live with that what if, and I thought, this is finally my chance to go to the school that I want to go to, and I'm going to take it.
Nice. And let's talk a little bit about this year. So what do you think is more or less challenging about 2L year compared to 1L year?
Well, you definitely have more time. Someone was reminding me the other day, we were taking 18 credits our first semester. I'm like, no way.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. I'm taking 12 right now, to put that in context.
Wow. And did you get to basically pick all of your classes this time around?
Yes. I think something that is more challenging about 2L is that there's a greater expectation to take leadership roles in your various orgs that you're in. So I'm on the board of the Harvard Law Entrepreneurship Project, and that's actually been really pleasant. But since I'm a board member, I took a step back with my involvement in the groups in other ways. So last year, I was a team lead for the projects in fall semester and spring semester. And this year, I've just decided to be a board member. I'm the VP of communications, and I'm just doing that. And I've been fine with that.
Let me just break in for a second. Did you find it challenging? It sounds like you were very involved with this organization as a 1L. Did you find that challenging to fit in around your fairly heavy course load?
Yes, because our deadlines for our legal research and writing class overlapped with our internal deadlines for HLEP. So managing, completing a memo for this organization while also being on top of my legal research and writing stuff was challenging. So the organization does a pretty good job of trying not to have the deadlines overlap too much, but in the spring semester, it definitely was more of an issue.
Yeah, I know. I always encourage people to do some type of pro bono work their first year to just get some of that hands-on experience and kind of feel more connected to the world and not just be in that law school bubble. But obviously, it can be very challenging to fit it in.
On the plus side, though, I recently I was notified that I completed all my 50 hours of pro bono.
Exactly, so just knock that out early. Yes,
I knocked it out before I even finished 2L, so that was the plus side.
No, that's great because some people are struggling to get that done. Like the last semester is a 3L and they're really miserable. But yeah, that is definitely an upside. That's a great point. What are you looking forward to having the chance to do the rest of your time in law school? Kind of what's on your agenda?
I think another thing that's challenging is that there's less guidance or hand-holding. Like there's a lot of attention given to the 1Ls, like instructing them about how they should choose classes or prepare for different things. Whereas as a 2L, you're expected to know more of that stuff and reach out if you don't understand. And that can be more difficult. It's more on you to maintain your relationships with your professors and your friends. There's not these artificial boundaries created by your section and school-sponsored activities. So it's more on you to stay in contact with your friends. And
yeah, that's definitely, I found that to be true too. It was kind of fun because suddenly I was like seeing people I hadn't, I met at orientation and we were friendly for about a week and I didn't see them for a year. And then suddenly we'd have a class together and I was like, oh, right, we actually should hang out. We liked each other. Mm-hmm. Definitely a lot more flexibility. Do you find your journal work to be particularly time consuming? I know that's an issue for a lot of 2Ls.
The journal isn't too time consuming. Well, at least the journal I'm on. The business review, they have one subsite in the fall and one subsite for the spring. And something unique about Harvard's journals is that besides the Harvard Law Review, you don't have to write onto any of the journals. So you participate if you want to. Anyone can participate.
Oh, I actually didn't know that. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that whole process, when you told me you had like 2 days turnaround between finishing your final and starting work, a lot of I remember I finished classes and then had like a 3 or 4 days to do the write-on competition for the law review stuff and then had to start working. And that can also just turn into a complete mess. It's not how I'd recommend that people organize their time. What are you looking forward to having the chance to do the rest of your time in law school? What's on your agenda?
So I'll be taking a clinic next semester. I know I said I'm doing the independent clinical at the SEC, but I'm doing a transaction clinic next semester, and I'll be working with a little bit more entrepreneurship and community development work, working with small businesses from the Jamaica Plains area here in Massachusetts, and so I'm looking forward to that. Also looking forward to just like deepening my involvement in the different organizations. So I'm pretty involved in HLEP, but probably looking forward to taking on more responsibility in Alianza and Balsa here at school.
Speaking of those, what has been your experience as a minority woman in law school? Do you think that's been any special challenge for you?
There aren't too many Latino women in law school, or especially not a lot of Dominican women. And I think that it's been a little bit challenging as an Afro-Latino woman in particular, because I feel like I don't feel like the Latino group at Harvard is completely representative of all Latinos. So I have found my home also in the Black Law Student Association as well. And so I think I take a little bit from both, and I think that's been great for me.
Yeah.
And it's also challenging because when I first decided to come to law school, a lot of people would say, so why law school? And I don't think that part of me feels like it was coming from a place of curiosity, but then also it was kind of like, why not law school? Or like, are you asking me that question because I'm a Latina woman?
Would you say that to a white guy who told you they were going to law school? I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's definitely an interesting scene. Well, we're actually almost out of time here, but before we wrap up, what would you say were your favorite and least favorite aspects of going to law school, specifically at Harvard? Because I know people are always curious about schools that are not their own.
You can pretty much find people here who have done everything, like been professional athletes, artists, done it all. Like one of my professors was talking about the color gray, and it was like a very specific type of gray, and he's like, we're at Harvard, I'm sure one of you has been an interior designer. And it's
true.
Like, it's pretty true. Like, yeah, you'll find a little bit of everything here, and I really do like the fact that, contrary to what some people might think, Harvard really does choose people for the whole package. It's not just about their LSAT score. You really find people who are well-rounded here.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. A friend of mine from Columbia ended up teaching at Harvard, and she was like, wow, the students here are really different. Like, they're actually like so much more interested, it seems, in like the material inherently, which I thought was quite interesting. All right, well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Anything else you'd like to share at this point?
That's all for me. Thank you so much for letting me have this conversation with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee and Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.